This year, I want to spend some time thinking about hope. Hope is going to be the theme for this year's Advent. It's not just actually going to be the theme for this year's Advent, but I actually have been praying a lot and spending time with God and asking Him and talking to other people as well about what they feel for our church. And I really think hope is something that we're going to lean into for the next few years. Being a hope church, a church that brings hope, a church that knows hope and brings hope to the world around it. And I'm going to explain why I think that theme resonates so much for us in a moment. But I want to start by unpacking that this Advent. And the different speakers we have over Advent are going to each unpack a different traditional text, but looking at what it means for us, about how we can find hope, about how we can share hope with others, and about how we can become a hope church by doing good, by bringing hope to people. So that's roughly what we're doing. So if you don't want to turn up church for the next 3 months, then that's fine. You'd knock yourselves out. You know what we're going to be doing. Joking, come to church. This week's lunchtime summary is this. We want to be people who know the hope of Christ, who can share that hope with others, and who demonstrate it to our village and beyond. We want to be people who know the hope of Christ, who share that hope with others, and who demonstrate it to our village and beyond. Those who know hope, those who share hope, and those who demonstrate hope. I'm going to put that slide back on the screen in a moment so that it's there, and if you're taking notes, you can write down. But first, though, we're going to read from the Bible. So let's turn to Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 1. I don't know. There's a competition to find out. First one to find it wins a prize. 667. Who was that? 687. Well done. Very good. Your prize is a free lunch. If you want to stay after the service, you can have a free lunch, completely on us. Congratulations. Okay, 687 in your Bibles. I've got a different copy that's mine. I like to use mine. So I'm on a different page number. Right, Isaiah chapter 2. This is what Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths." The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for any more. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord. Amen. It's the word of God. Please forgive me if I seem to be reading my text more than I do normally. I'm conscious of the time and there's stuff I actually want to cover, so I'm going to try and stick more closely to what I say, but hopefully that won't damage it. One of the things I like to do each week is read different publications from different political and social perspectives to get a feel for what people think in the world. My job is to communicate Christ to people, to teach them about Jesus, so it helps me to know where they're coming from. And I was struck when I was reading an article in The Spectator online this week by a guy called Gareth Roberts. I don't know anything about Gareth. But he was writing an article called "How Did Contemporary Culture Become So Dismal?" How did contemporary culture become so dismal? Now, he's not actually saying it's bad. He thinks that there are lots of good things that are produced, good quality things that are produced in contemporary culture, right? And that's obviously true, right? If you watch films or TV, they're obviously better made than they ever have been before, for example. But Gareth was pondering the bleakness and harshness, both thematically and in terms of the content and in terms of the way it looked, the aesthetics, of a lot of contemporary culture. And he compares it to examples taken from previous years. He's not being nostalgic, he's just noticing an interesting change towards culture becoming a lot bleaker. He writes this all speaks to the dismal tone of contemporary mass culture. It's timid and downbeat and sad. People are always isolated and lost. Maybe with one other person they can rely on, possibly if they're lucky, but beware, in Adland, those people are often going to die. The visual aesthetic of what we watch has gradually become jaded too. In TV ads, it's always dark outside and not much brighter inside. It makes an interesting observation about the new series of The Crown, which I haven't seen, which is that at times they open the windows and let the light in, and it seems as if the room doesn't change at all, because everything's dark. I actually think that Gareth is onto something, not about The Crown. I express no opinion about The Crown. There is, I think, a general sense of despondency and malaise about the UK and the West generally. I'm not trying to make a political statement. I'm not coming from the right or from the left. I'm certainly not blaming anybody. I'm just noticing what I think is true. It's a kind of despair, a failure of hope. Why might this be the case? I think there are lots of things people point to. They point to different political events. You can pick whatever you like if you're from one perspective or another. It's easy to find a scapegoat event. They point to declining economies. They point to whatever. I actually think the cause is much deeper than that. It's spiritual. With a naturalistic view of life, forgive me if this goes over your head, I'm going to explain it in a minute. A naturalistic view of life is an understanding of the world that's purely mechanical, where there's nothing spiritual. There is no God, there is no soul, and therefore all there are chemical reactions. That's what I'm using chemical, I'm going to say this for the sake of Andrew, I'm using chemical in a non-technical sense to encompass physical reactions. Andrew challenged me on my imprecise use of scientific terms earlier. I'm making a general point. If you believe that all there are reactions, atoms, molecules, subatomic particles, quantum particles bouncing off one another, there's no space for hope in your worldview. If you don't have a space for the spirit, for something outside of just physical reactions, then there's no space for hope. The brutal facts of life are cold and indifferent. Hope is as irrational and alien to an atheist materialist mindset as fairies and God. Indeed, it is more so. A world that cuts itself off from God has no purpose, because the idea of purpose is meaningless. After all, there is no purpose in a tennis ball falling to the ground. It just falls. A rock has no particular purpose. It just is. And you and I and the world generally are on this mindset without God little more than highly developed rocks. If there's no place for the redemptive love of a creator, there's no reason to hope, no reason to believe, little reason to do anything but despair. In case you think this is a Christian polemicist and I'm being unfair, I want to give a word on this to what I think is probably the single most brilliant atheist philosopher, which is Friedrich Nietzsche, a guy in the 19th century. If you want to read a rigorous case for atheism, read Nietzsche. Nietzsche has the courage to understand what it is he's saying and to articulate it clearly. He famously believed that modern society had killed God, but that wasn't a cause for celebration, it was a cause for despair. Because Nietzsche understood what the implications of that were. In its place, there was nothing but a cold, indifferent, and heartless world, the triumph of the strongest over the weakest. And in the face of that, is it any wonder that society despairs? If our culture has abandoned, it is as if, our culture has abandoned belief in Christ and the Christian worldview and found that instead of freedom, it's irreparably harmed itself. It reminds me of little more than Jenga, the game where you pull bricks out and place them on the top. And you imagine the tower is getting taller and taller, but actually it's just getting weaker and weaker until eventually it will inevitably fall. This isn't a new insight. As St. Paul said, if Christ is not raised from the dead, then what's the point? I'm paraphrasing. What reason is there for hope? I think these are really uncomfortable things to say, and they must be uncomfortable to hear, and I can see that it's not very entertaining. But I think it's true. And I think that the sooner we grapple with it, the sooner we can start doing something about it. In its place, society looks not for hope, but for distraction. So there is vastly more television available than there ever has been. Not a problem, I love TV. You know, you want to be careful what you watch on it, but the truth is it's there to distract us from living real lives. Isn't it funny how rarely when you watch TV shows the characters spend their time watching TV? They spend their time doing stuff. Right? They live real lives. Not us, we watch other people. Distracting yourself. It's not, I'll be more serious than that. I don't think it's a coincidence that the movement to legalize cannabis, and you might have a political view on why it's a good idea for drug control and taxation, all the rest of it. I'm not expressing a view on those things, but it is indisputably true that there is greater evidence of the harm that that drug causes, particularly to people who are prone to psychosis, particularly to young people, now than there ever has been, and yet the movement to legalize it is going stronger and stronger. Why? I can only speculate, but I wonder whether it has something to do with distraction. It's easier not to face up to the bleakness of a hopeless life if you have a narcotic to take away the pain. I'm not going to finish there. That would be a bleak and unpleasant way to finish. We think, what on earth did I come out for this morning? It started off with that lovely little blonde girl lighting the candle and we sang happy birthday, and then Phil started railing against the consequences of materialism, and we ended up on cannabis legalization, and then it ended. I don't know what happened. What is a Christian response to this world? What is a Christian response to this world? I would suggest that over the past few years what we've seen is various other non-Christian responses, and each one of them has at very least not succeeded, if not failed. Some of them are distractions, some of them are medicalization, some of them are pursuing different gods, if I'm honest. Economic growth is a god that's pursued. Even scientific progress can be a god that's pursued. Political reform is a god that's pursued. None of them have succeeded. What do Christians have to say to that? Well, I think what Christians have to say to that is Jesus. The answer to a hopeless world is Christ. It's Christmas. In the reading we had at the beginning from Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah is in a situation in which there is no reason for Israel to hope. She is militarily, economically, culturally decadent, cut off from the rest of the world around her, threatened by superior powers. There's no reason to hope. And yet what Isaiah says is God is going to do something. And that's what Christmas is all about. Christians read this as looking forward to the coming of the Messiah, the coming of Jesus. Recognizing that the darkness that humanity defaults to is overwhelming, and celebrating God's decision to bring light into that darkness. To show us that a different life, forgiveness, and heaven are all possibilities for us. The Christian response to materialism and to the atheist world is to say it's not true. It is not true that there is no point. It's not true that there is no hope. It is not true that you are as meaningless and aimless as a highly developed, highly evolved rock. And please don't hear me having a go at scientific theories about evolution. I'm very happy to talk about that. That's not what I'm intending to say in that comment. What I'm saying is that at the very least, every single Christian wants to say there's more than that. And Christmas is at the heart of it. Christmas isn't twee. You see, twee is pretending that there's no problem outside. Twee is shutting the curtains to the darkness and saying it's fine in here, it's okay, we don't need to think about it. That's not what Christmas is. Christmas is saying there is darkness, there is despair, there is hopelessness, and we're going to do something about it because God has done something about it. On its own, the world continues in brokenness and pain and conflict without hope. But Isaiah says God is coming to change that. And so he draws this picture of a hill being raised up. It's mad when you think about it, isn't it? I mean, you get this kind of slightly psychedelic sense with some of these prophets when they talk about the pictures they saw. He says, God is going to raise up a hill. This hill's going to get bigger so everyone can see it. It's going to be God who does it. And then people from all over the world are going to flow to this hill. They're going to come to it because they look around themselves and they can see it and they want something and they can tell it's there. And they're going to find instructions about how they should live, about how men and women should live together, about how they're supposed to work, about how they should raise their children, about how they should forgive one another, about how races should relate to one another. They're going to find instruction that brings life, both now and in the future. And they're going to beat their swords into plowshares. It must have been an idiom, a kind of proverb in ancient Israel, because it comes up again and again in the Old Testament, and actually came to dominate at one point even in English culture. I think those of you who were around in the 1970s will remember there was a paper produced, I think, by Baroness Williams entitled Swords into Plowshares, about industrial relations. This idea of peace between people, finding a better way forward, and there being peace. Peace with God and with each other. They come to dwell in the light. In other words, they found hope. Before, there was nothing but destroying one another, and now there is hope because of what God has done. And there are particular things I think Isaiah wants us to see about this. First, it's something that God has done, that God does. That's how it starts in verse 1 and 2. The vision that Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw, interestingly, if you go back to the original Hebrew, I don't do a lot of this in my talks, but if you do, he says he saw a word. That's literally what it says. He saw a word. That's an idea that the New Testament writers would bring up and say, who is the word you can see? It's Christ. St. John, writing in his letters, says, I want to tell you about that which we saw, that which we touched, that which we handled, the Word of God. In the beginning was the Word. Isaiah saw the Word. He saw that Christ was coming. And what do we understand from that? He says humanity can't rescue itself. I love Virgin Mary. I'm very, very reverential of her. I love her. I'm very happy to use all the titles that people use for her. God-bearer. Wonderful woman. Even the Virgin Mary did not make the incarnation happen. The coming of Christ was not her choice. It was God. Even she who carried him. St. John says that. He says he came not of a father's will. In other words, I don't want to paint a picture for you too vigorously, but not because a man decided that he wanted to have a child. Not because of blood, not because of adoption, not because of any of these things. He came because of God. A sheer act of grace and love, something that God did. Friends, the hope of humanity is not found in trying harder and harder, in political renewal or reform, or in good social works, in higher taxation or better public services, or cutting tax and having a more streamlined state, or any of this stuff. You might imagine watching the World Cup right now that the hope of humanity is whether the England captain can wear a rainbow armband or not during a match. The amount of energy and effort that issue has received in the press. Whether a pundit in a studio wears a rainbow brooch, you think, goodness me. Talk about fiddling on the decks of the Titanic. I don't want to be too critical. People do this. They fixate on little issues because they can't change anything big. But it's like arguing about what track's playing on the CD player as the car crashes. The hope of humanity is not found in any of these things. It's found in the sovereign work of God, in the coming of Christ into the world. Anything we do as a church has to begin with God. If we want to be a hope church, and I really want you to want to be a hope church, I believe that you should want to be a hope church, a church that brings hope to people. It's got to begin with God. What else does Isaiah say? Well, he says it goes out to everyone. What God does doesn't just transform his people, it transforms the world. That's what Marissa was saying. When we went to this conference together with 4 or 5 of us, we're going to get other people up to hear what they took from it. You see that when you work together with other churches, you start to get a bigger picture of the idea that God is going out into the world and changing the world. Christmas is not for Arch Road. For those of you who don't know, that's the road outside. It's for Arch Road, for Molesey Road, for Queen's Road, and on and on and on. If we want to be a people of hope, we have to be a people of evangelism and mission. That means sharing our faith with our friends. Now that's hard. That's hard. I want to acknowledge that. I'm not a natural evangelist. I'm married to one. And it's exhausting. But you have a way of doing evangelism that works for you. Let's find it. Let's work with it. Let's bring the people to the mountain. We have to try and make converts. I'm not apologizing for that. Right? I get that there are some of my brothers and sisters in other churches, and I'm not going to name them, but they have a real problem with this. I want you to make converts of your friends and families because I want them to know Christ. Because I'm not happy about them living without hope. I'm not happy about my family living without hope. I want them to know Jesus. I want them to. I want you to want them to. We have to bring wisdom and provision and peace to those who don't have it. So Isaiah then comes around to the start. He's quite really neatly structured this. He was really by Isaiah. And verse 5, he says, having begun with, well, God's going to do it. There's nothing you're going to do. He then says, so let's do it. It's kind of paradox. God's going to do it, so you do it. Israel, walk in the light of the Lord, he says in verse 5. Isaiah knows that for this hope to go out to the rest of the world, for it to make a difference to the lives of others around Israel, God's people need to act. They need to walk in the light. They've got to live it. God has acted by coming in Jesus. He still acts today through his Holy Spirit. But if that hope is going to reach the world around us, we have to respond to it. God acts, so let's act. What does this mean for us? My friends, we are called to know, offer, and embody this vision to everyone who needs it. And if you want to walk with us as a church this year, and in the years to come, and I really hope and pray that you do, you're very welcome, then you are called to do that too. You were called by God and redeemed through his Son, not simply so you could receive the hope of something better. It is for that. But you were called and redeemed, we were called and redeemed in order to bring hope to the world. It isn't optional. There is a spiritual war on. We fight against the causes of despair and distraction. We fight against the causes of hedonism and hopelessness, of darkness and despondency, and we do it by knowing, sharing, and living as followers of Christ. My friends, I want you to be ambitious. I want you to be spiritually ambitious. Ambitious as men and women of God. I want us to be an ambitious church. Ambition is not English. I remember when I was training in university, and a guy from the bar came and he was drawing the distinction between American lawyers and English lawyers. And I love Americans. If you're American, I'm very pro-American. Not on Friday night, but I am now. Maybe the revolution was a mistake, but we all make mistakes. He said in American TV court shows you see, lawyers stand up and they shout, "I object!" And they're pacing up and down. He says if you go into an English courtroom, you never find anyone who says that. If someone's doing something wrong, you might get a polite cough. So a guy's leading the witness in the other barrister says, he says if they carry on doing it in an American courtroom, they're pounding on the table. It's unfair, it's unjust, He says in an English courtroom, you might get, they'll clear their throat a little bit louder. And maybe say, "My lord, my lord." They sit down again. So, "Yes, Mr. Fellows." It's not very English to be ambitious. To be explicit about what you want to achieve. I don't care. I want you to be ambitious. I want to be ambitious. We should dream of how God could use us to transform people's lives by being a hope people, by being a hope church. We should dream of growing in peace and power as we more deeply know the hope and light of Christ for ourselves. Don't you want that? We should dream of growing in numbers as more and more people receive the hope of Jesus for themselves. They find peace and forgiveness and a way of life. We should dream. We should dream of growing in influence, as we demonstrate the wisdom and practical goodness of our hope to all in good works and acts of compassion, particularly for the poor. Now, they'll scorn, but in the end, our work should demonstrate the wisdom of the way of life. We should dream. We should be ambitious to resource and equip our brothers and sisters in other churches. We should not be content to find Baptist churches struggling and closing, other churches struggling and closing, whether Anglican or Catholic or whatever. We should dream. We should aim to start new churches. Not next year, but the year after or the year after that. Whenever it comes about, we should want there to be more churches and more churches and more churches. Because the more churches there are, the more people's lives are impacted. We should dream. We should seek out partners and friends who can work with us to make this a reality. I want to be as explicitly as I can about this. As explicit as I can about this. I dream of more baptisms next year than we had this year. I dream of more baptisms the year after that than we had then. And the next year, and the next year, and the next year. I dream of a river cascading from this church down the road and into the village, bringing life. I dream of this being a church or a family of churches that includes 150 adult worshippers by 2026. I think I've nailed my colours to the mask. I dream of that. I dream of 200 by 2030, and so on and so on and so on. And I really genuinely believe that we can get there. I dream of us becoming a church or a group of churches that is so completely committed to doing good and being effective at making a difference in the lives of the wider community around us, that when people think of Hersham and which bodies are indispensable, they name this church. I want us to be top of their mind. What could this village not live without? That church. I dream of building a strong and sustainable community of worshippers where people can find practical wisdom for how to live, where men find purpose and meaning, where children can be raised well and safely, where addicts can find help, where those who are struggling financially find practical wisdom and generosity. I dream of teaching a way of life rooted not in the fashions and fads of the latest nonsense disseminated as distraction from modish Marxists in universities, but in the timeless and enduring rock of Christ. A dream of being a Hope Church, and I want you to dream it too. I want you to dream it. How do we do this? I'm finishing. First, make brave choices. If we're going to be a church of hope, if this has captured you even a little bit, we're going to need to be courageous in mission. That's going to mean making choices that are uncomfortable for us at times. We've done it before, we're going to do it again. 7 years ago, this church decided that we were going to change the way that we did church, the way that we did worship, the way that we structured things, because we wanted to reach our village. I want us to do that every year. As a group, it's going to mean being brave in committing to programs or initiatives to bring Christ to our community, not fearing that they might fail, but dreaming that they might succeed. There are going to be failures. We're going to start something and no one's going to turn up. We're going to imagine there's a need and it's going to turn out someone else was meeting it. We're going to screw up in all sorts of ways. But then we might succeed and lives will be transformed. And I want us to be captured not by the fear of the former, but by the joy of the latter. It means assessing our church life with everything from the name of the church to the way that we do services, the way that we use the hall, whatever, to help spread this message of hope. It's going to mean seeking out relationships with others who share these values, who want to plant churches, who want to transform communities, who pray with us, encourage us. And that's going to be uncomfortable. At times it's going to mean that we don't always exactly fit together. But the dream keeps us going. It's going to mean, secondly, praying and fasting. As individuals, I would like everyone in this church, if you regularly worship with us, to draw up a list of 5 people you're praying for each week. 1 a day, Monday to Friday, of your friends who are going to become Christians and know the hope of Jesus. You don't need to tell anyone. I would love it if you wrote them down. I'm not going to ask you for the list. I'm going to pray for you. I commit to pray for this church every week. I have a list of everyone who comes regularly if I've got round to it, amending the list, and I go through and pray for your names. You'll often get a text message from me if I've had time, asking how you're doing. I'm praying for you even if I don't. I want you to pray for them. 5 people. Everyone can do that. Write them down. One a morning. Lord, would you help John know Jesus? Would you help Jane know Jesus? Commit to fasting with us as a church in January. I don't know about you, I was captured by Aaron's sermon 2 weeks ago. We're going to fast through January. I'm giving you notice now. That doesn't mean I want everybody to skip the whole of January for meals. That's going to be a fast way to church shrinkage in waistlines, if not in bereavements. But what I mean is we're going to pick one day a week for each of us, and we're going to aim to fill all those days, and you're going to fast in whatever way you can. If you can't skip every meal, don't skip every meal. You might just skip meat, for example. Do whatever you can. We're going to do it as a church. We're going to do it for a month. We're going to pray and fast. Third, pursue Christ. Be serious about Jesus. Be serious about Jesus. My friends, there were times in this country in which it was possible not to be serious about Jesus and to go along, and the culture was fine because there was enough of Christ in the air, if I could put it that way. There was enough salt that the food wasn't going bad. Right now, all the salt's been removed, or is being removed, and the food is going bad at an alarming rate. Now is not the time for trivial Christianity. Now is not the time to be bound up. Netflix is not as important as Christ. Amazon Prime is not as important as Christ. See, I'm an equal opportunities corporate offender. Doesn't mean give your whole lives to whatever. You need breaks. Best thing I do every week is playing a jazz band. I don't do it for Jesus. I do it for fun. Be sensible, be wise, but be serious. If you're not sure how, go back through the talks in the last 2 months. We've just covered how to be a serious disciple of Jesus. Do it. If I sound too intense, I'm sorry. I don't want to tickle your tummies. I want to inspire your minds and your hearts. We want to be those who know the hope of Christ, who share that hope with others, and who demonstrate to our village and beyond.